I tried to tell my daughter recently, who's considering the military, where does a general keep his army? You familiar with where the general keeps his army? In his sleevey. Huh? Is this thing on? Huh? Clearly not a comedian. You good to go? Okay, great. For those of you watching online, you've just rescued the crowd here in person at Bay Presbyterian Church from my terrible jokes as I tap dance before the next speaker. So I have the pleasure of introducing our next quick take speaker is Chris Hulshof. Chris is an associate professor and disability ministry program director for Liberty University's John W. Rawlings School of Divinity. He also serves on the board for the Banquet Network, and he's author of a book, Jesus and Disability, A Guide to Creating an Inclusive Church. Please join me in welcoming Chris Hulshof.
Thank you. This is for my slides? Yes? All right. All right.
They're getting them all set up for you.
All right. Is this on? Yeah, okay, now I hear it now. Mike, I didn't hear for a second. All right. All right, while they're setting that up, I have the opportunity to teach, and I walk around, so I don't know if that's going to work. I have the opportunity to teach college students. I love teaching college students. And one of the questions I get asked most from college students is this, and it started 5 years ago, and the question usually goes this way: have you ever heard of religious scrupulosity? And the first time I heard it, I thought, no, I have not. And so tell me about it. And what I've come to realize, and this is probably not something I'm supposed to say as a professor, but some of my favorite students suffer from this. And so I've had the opportunity over the last 5-6 years to talk with students, to work with students as they go through this. So if you don't know what religious scrupulosity is, let me just give you quickly a definition. This is the textbook definition, I guess, from a OCD journal. But then I'm going to give you the one that I've worked with in the students that I work with. So scrupulosity literally means fearing sin where there is none. Common religious obsessions include recurrent doubts that one has committed sins or moral transgressions, intrusive, sacrilegious, or blasphemous thoughts, doubts that one is not faithful, moral, or pious enough, fears that one didn't perform a religious prayer or ceremony properly, persistent fear of eternal damnation and punishment from God. So these are good Christian people who are sitting in a church on a Sunday morning, and they're hearing the message and they're struggling with living that. I hear it, now what do I do with it? And so in working with some students on this is kind of the definition that we talk about, and I really like the way in which this one begins. It's the tender conscience paralyzed by spiritual fight or fright. And I like the word tender conscience. Long before counselors and psychologists started talking about religious OCD, the early church would talk about it in terms of tender conscience. And what I've come to realize with all of the people that I talk about this, that this is the one thing they all have in common. They have a tender conscience. And they are convinced that their actions, that the things that they're doing, that there is sin when there is no sin. So I'll give you 2 examples. First example would be the guy who goes to the grocery store, and as he goes to the grocery store, he gets to the checkout, he's got 2 bags of groceries, and then when he's done with his 2 bags of groceries and he gets home, he takes the receipt, he puts the receipt out, he puts the groceries, unpacks all the groceries, goes through all of the receipt to make sure everything that is on the receipt is in the bag, because he's too afraid he may have stole something. It's even worse if he went through the self-checkout line. Well, if there's something that's here but not there, maybe I consciously meant to steal it, and maybe I'm a thief. It's the woman who goes to a party with her friends, and as she's out at this party with her friends, and they're at their house and they're watching watching movies and whatever, and she, when the night is over, rather than being thankful to God for all of the good friends and the good time she had, she comes back and she replays that entire event over in her mind. And she goes through every single one of those interactions she had, and she thinks about this interaction she had with the guys at the party, and she thinks, I was talking to him, and then I kind of quickly flipped my hair, and maybe he thought I was flirting with him, and maybe I shouldn't have, and I need to confess that. And then she thinks about she was talking with another one of her friends, and they were talking about, they'd seen somebody in the mall that was a friend of theirs, and she thought, well, she wasn't there. Maybe that's gossip, and I should confess gossip. And then they ordered pizza, and so when the Domino's driver came and they were all throwing in $1 for tip, she looked in her wallet and she went, well, I got a 1 and a 5, and she put in the 1, and when she gets home and replays that in her head, she thinks, well, I should have gave the 5 and not the 1, and so maybe I have the sin of greed. No sin was present in any of that, but in her mind, she is convinced that she's guilty of all 3 of those things. That would be 2 good examples of what religious scrupulosity looks like. Now, what does this look like if we're going to talk about some helps? Let me give you 3 quick ones so that some places to start here. So here's 3 things that I've found helpful with the people that I talk with who are suffering through this, working through this. One is really how we talk about the gospel. How we talk about the gospel, how we talk about the gospel, especially in terms of application or implication. Right, and almost every sermon ends with points of application. Based on all of this, here's what you should do. Rather than implication, based on all of this, here's how good God is. The discussion becomes about sort of a do-it-yourself framework for Christianity. Here's the things that you ought to do. The way I like to explain it is, imagine if everybody walking into your church had a backpack on. And at the end of that sermon, at the end of that lesson, that backpack, they got a brick sort of based on that conversation. So you gave them 3 things to do, and so as they walked out, they got 3 bricks put in the backpack, and they spent the week trying to, and if you accomplished those things, you got to take a brick out. And so it's been a good week, and you got to remove sort of 2 bricks from that backpack. But you still had the other one in there. Well, then the next week you come back into church, and all of a sudden, hey, there's 5 things for you to do. And so now as you're leaving, you get 5 bricks put in there, but you've got already 1 in there. Now you got 6. And it hasn't been a good week at all. Matter of fact, you don't get any of those things done that you were told to do. And instead, the 2 things that you did last week, you'll find yourself undoing those. And so now when you walk back in on a Sunday morning, you've got 8 bricks in your backpack, and you're exhausted. It's the difference between talking about do versus done, or good news versus good advice. The gospel is so much more than good advice. It's good news. The second thing I would say is, and I'm an old Baptist pastor, so I'm going to make these all have S's. Sanctification would be the second one. How we talk about sanctification. Oftentimes what I've found is that for most of the students that I interact with who suffer from this, is that their view of sanctification is that Jesus Christ did everything at justification on the cross, and now everything else for me is something that I need to do. In other words, what they end up thinking is that, and this is from Harold Sankbill's book, on sanctification. The Christian lifestyle is nothing less than Christ in action. It's Jesus Christ living out his life in his people. And so what they think is Jesus did all of this at justification, and now it's my job at the cross, and now it's my job to do everything else. And they set out to do all of this, and so they have this sort of do-it-yourself framework for Christianity. And so I try to remind them of what Paul said in Philippians 1, verse 6. I am confident of this, that the one who began a good work in you will what? Will continue to complete it. Not will chip in where you need help. Will say, I did my part, now you got the rest. Will continue to complete it until the day of Jesus Christ. Paul talking about, this is in Paul's, in Acts 26, it's in his defense of his life as he's nearing the end of his life. He says this, I will rescue you from your people and from the Gentiles to whom I'm sending you. This is God speaking to Paul, to whom I'm sending you to open their eyes so that they may turn from darkness to light, from the power of Satan to God, so that they may receive forgiveness of sins and a place among those who are sanctified by faith in me. Oftentimes what happens is when we have a sort of do-it-yourself framework to the faith that we profess, the do-it-yourself sort of version of Christianity is that sanctification becomes all about me. Jesus did all of this. Now I have to do all of this. Last one I would say is this. Would be the sacrament. When we talk about the sacrament, and I have one specific one in mind, and that's the Lord's table. What I've found in talking with students here with this is that coming to the communion table should be something that is there should be something inviting and warm and celebratory and enjoyable about it. But for them, it is the most anxious experience in their life. Why? Because we began by saying, let a man examine himself. And they go back through everything. And again, in their religious OCD mind, everything is a sin. Everything I did is a sin, so I shouldn't come. I can't come. I talk with students who be like, I can't remember the last time I took communion because I'm too afraid if I go there. And what should be a place of welcome, a place of encouragement, a place of hope, a place of healing becomes a place of avoiding and fleeing. I like to remind students when I talk about this that when Jesus, before he tells the parable of the lost coin and the lost sheep and the lost son, that story of 3 stories put together, it's the religious leaders who can't understand what Jesus is doing, and they say something like this: this man welcomes sinners and he eats with them. This man welcomes sinners and he eats with them. And I would suggest to them that this is exactly what he still does. He welcomes sinners and he eats with them. And so come to the table. He's welcoming you to come to his table. How we talk about, how we end a sermon, how we end a talk matters. Is it about what you should do? Here's 3 things to do based on what we've talked about this morning. Or is it about, here's what Christ has done for you? Application versus implication. Sanctification. Do we stop at justification and then sort of create a do-it-yourself version of Christianity so that sanctification looks like, well, I guess I got to get to work? And then how do we talk about the Lord's table? Is it a place where you are invited to come and to know the healing that is provided through a Savior who suffered and died, rose and ascended for you?